Hello, welcome to the Millionaire Woman Show, where we'll be discussing leadership, business, and human potential, inspiring you to live rich from the inside out. Unlock your creativity, stretch out of your comfort zone, break through your barriers, take inspired action, and achieve epic results. Now, here's your host, two-time best-selling author, speaker, and certified executive coach, Deborah Kosowski.
Welcome, everyone. It's Deborah Kosowski with the Millionaire Woman Show, and today we have a special guest, Dr. Mark Goulston. He's widely regarded as a people hacker. Dr. Goulston began his career as an interventional psychiatrist focusing on suicide, violence intervention, prevention, and a UCLA professor of psychiatry. He then extended his work to training FBI and police hostage negotiators, and then to the corporate world and NGOs. His people hacking has now extended to hacking genius, and he has recently been speaking, writing, and providing webinars on Insanely Great, How to Think Like Steve Jobs. Along with that, he helps companies to see into their futures the way Jobs could. And by the way, it's not that difficult. It's just difficult to envision a different paradigm when you're within your own paradigm. You know the saying? When you're a hammer, the world looks like a nail. And wow, Mark, you're looking like Steve Jobs today.
Well, I'm getting in character because if this comes off, it may be like a one-man show, because what's really been elusive about Steve Jobs is figuring out how he did what he did. There's lots of books written about him, but it'll be the principles of Steve Jobs, but it's never the steps. And one of the things that I learned, and this is important for your viewers and listeners, is when you're trying to get buy-in from the world, people can't think outside their paradigm. People are stuck in their paradigm. So unless you give them a step-by-step process where one step fits the next one like Lego blocks, people check out. That's why in this, I actually have I deconstructed how he created and built Apple into 10 steps. And one of the things I eliminated, and because I've discovered that rank and file frontline people can't stand these words. They can't stand mission, vision, culture, values, because it's too abstract when you're just on the front lines. Mm-hmm. And they don't push back against the CEO because the CEO is very excited about that. And the CEO can think about these high-minded things, but you need to be able to get into where the other person's coming from. So you want to be able to give people step-by-step steps that they can accomplish that aren't too complicated. And that was part of the genius of Steve Jobs is here's another thing, and then we'll get back to our interview, hopefully. He discovered, and again, these are the 7 things that create the best user experience. UX wasn't even a term, before he passed. But when you come up with products or services, what they have to be is they have to be relevant, meaning it has to be tied to what the person's trying to accomplish or buy or feel. It has to be simple, has to be reliable, has to be repeatable, has to be fun, should be beautiful, and given the millennial generation, it should be meaningful. So if you think about all those 7 things, which he did naturally, that'll provide the best user experience. So did that make sense, Deborah, those 7 steps?
Absolutely. And, as we were talking about earlier, sometimes those questions are going to go wherever our interview goes. And that excites me because as I was listening to you say those things and thinking about the culture, the values, and the mission, what comes to my mind is thinking about how Steve Jobs, as well as some of the greatest leaders, how do they create that compelling vision using exactly the 7 steps that you were just talking about?
Well, I think they're able to see into that. I think a turning point for Steve Jobs was, first of all, he was adopted, and even though he said he got over it, he really, people who are adopted, there's always that question in their mind about sort of being rejected. And so I think there was a part of him that really wanted to have the world be part of the world. He wanted to be part of the world. And when he came up with those 7 steps, what happened is he was able to go from technology being a business to business thing to business to consumer. In fact, in my one-man play, there's a video I show of him in which he, in 1 minute, he talks about visiting Xerox PARC. And there's also a talk I've been giving around the country on how to kind of think about your products and services in a 4-step formula. The 4-step formula, though, is completed by those 7 steps. But the 4-step formula, this is something else you need to think about. And unless you're putting this into the experience of of everybody, they're going to just turn away. And the 4-step formula is, whoa, I can't believe what I just saw, heard, read, or felt. You know you've created whoa when the person says to you, can you repeat that again? Or if you're giving a presentation and people are texting, someone hears part of what you say and they elbow the person next to them and say, what did she say? What did he say? So you need that whoa to break in. And then the second step is wow. After you take a second listen to it, you say, that's astonishing, amazing, unbelievable. And then after that, you go, this is too good not to use. I don't know how I'm going to use it, but it's too good not to use. And finally, yes, when you figure out how to use it. And so that video, which I've more or less memorized, see if you can pick up the whoa, wow, yes. So he says, now let me get my Steve Jobs thing because he kind of looked like this. He said, so we visited Xerox PARC and they showed me 3 things. And I didn't even see 2 of the things they showed me because I was blinded by the first thing I saw. I didn't even notice the other 2 things. What I saw was the graphical user interface. That's the whoa. It was the best thing I'd ever seen in my life. That's the wow. It was flawed. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and it worked very well. That's the And then he says, and within 10 minutes of seeing that, I knew that one day all computers would work that way someday. And when you watch the video, he's humble when he says the word someday, because he's re-experiencing when he went from hustler to visionary. And what he realized is if we can make this thing fun, like a pinball machine, you know, working with the icons, we can take technology and expand it from the business world to the consumer world, which is what he did. And then those 7 other steps that I mentioned to you were ways of refining that. So can you see that in your mind's eye, that that's what he did, and that's what all of us need to do. And what I say to people is when you're giving a presentation, or if you look at your website, and I don't practice what I preach because my website's a mess, but you know, that's another story. The other story is you got to get a good team, Deborah. So that's why my website's a mess. But look at your website, look at everything people read, hear, or see about you, and do they go, whoa, wow? Because if they don't, they go, nah, never mind, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good filter for all of us.
And what I hear in those steps is that's where creativity and innovation spark. When you have that, how can I implement this? How can I integrate this into who I am? Because as you were saying that, of course, I'm going through what my website looks like. And am I creating that? Wow, I want a piece of that. And I think it's really important when people as leaders are speaking and creating that compelling vision with the people who are following them, to have those people. And I think that's where that engagement key comes in as well, to say, hey, I think I want to be a part of that.
Absolutely. I'm a man of many steps. Actually, why I came up with steps about 10 years ago, people said to me, Mark, you're not scalable because you don't have steps that other people can follow. And if you don't have steps and it's just your intuition, you will never have a business because nobody else can do it. And I got exhausted when someone said that to me. So since then, my mind sort of turned into creating all these kinds of steps. So I gave you those 7 steps of user experience. I just gave you the 4 steps of creating whoa, wow, yes. But getting back to leadership, I have 3 steps for leadership, and I wrote a blog on the difference between visionary leaders and visionary thinkers, because Steve Jobs was a visionary thinker, but he wasn't a visionary leader. And the 3 and the 3 parts of being a visionary thinker are what I call the 3 Ds. And the first D is you define reality. So Steve Jobs was able to say, if we can make a computer that's all those 7 things, simple, reliable, fun, et cetera, all consumers will want that. So you define reality. The next thing is you declare your intention. I don't know what it looks like, Steve Jobs would say, but I'll recognize it when I see it, and I'll kick off an on-off switch, even if we're $20 million into it, if it doesn't fit that reality. So define reality, declare your intention to create it, and the third is decide strategy to make it happen. Define reality, declare intention, decide strategy. Now, the difference between a visionary thinker and a visionary leader is a visionary thinker doesn't think about the decide strategy about empowering their people. And see, Steve Jobs was able to get around that and actually bully his people. But I think he was able to do that because he was inviting them to be part of the future, which is pretty exhilarating.
Yeah.
But I think a visionary leader is someone who knows that strategy, you really have to, empower and engage your people, because it's not going to work, especially with millennials. I don't think millennials would put up with what the bullying that Steve Jobs was able to get away with. So I think those pertain to the best leaders that I know, is that they define reality, declare intention, and decide strategy. So does that make sense to you, Deborah?
Absolutely. And my mind is racing because I want to slide into, because what brought me to get to know you is through your book, Just Listen. And for all of our listeners and our viewers, this is one book that you must have on your library shelf, and not just on your shelf. Make sure you read it. I listened to it first on audio, then I ran out and bought the book because of a very compelling story. One of the most powerful stories in the book for me was a story about the CEO who was having trouble connecting with his 15-year-old son and also having trouble with his company. And what I found most powerful, and maybe this is not what we see with Steve Jobs initially, is a leader displaying their vulnerability. Do you want to talk more about that story and that experience that you had?
Well, the story was I received a phone call from a, not a bad guy, but kind of full of himself guy. It seemed like an urgent phone message, and he said, Dr. Goulston, please call me as soon as you can. And I thought, oh my God, what crisis happened? And I called him and I said, what's the matter? And he said, I think you might have saved my life. And I said, well, what do you mean? I didn't know his life was in danger. I said, with your company? Did something happen that we avoided? He said, no, with my son. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we were talking about my son, and I was talking about how my son, I thought, needed to focus more, and my wife, I thought, was oversympathetic to him and said, well, he has ADD and it's not that easy for him. And my son, and then I asked him, is your son do drugs or party or something like that? He says, no, he's a good kid. I just think he needs to focus and maybe he's a little lazy. And I said to him, I said, I think you're missing the pain that your son is going through. And what I instructed him to say, which is why he was calling me, is I said, say to your son, I'll bet you sometimes feel that nobody knows what it's like to be so smart and not be able to use it at all. And he said, I said that to my son, and I'll get emotional. My son got tearful. And then I said to him, I'll bet you sometimes feel that you wish you were stupid, so people would take their expectations off you. And my son just teared up, and then he got to me, and I said, look at me, and I said, I'm sorry because I think I broke you. I think I kept laying on you and telling you and just broke you, and I didn't see this. And something that's not in the book, but I'll share here. And the son said to him, and I'm sorry for all the things that I did to deal with that, which you must never tell mom about. And then I asked him, I said, well, what are you doing now? And he said, well, it's my boy. I can't let him be alone. I just can't. So I come home and I take out my laptop and I say to him, I'm going to keep you company, and I don't intrude on him. But when he's there trying to do his homework, I sit on his bed, I have my laptop, and I just can't let him be alone like that. So that really changed sort of everything for him. But a little segue I want to do for our listeners. One of the things about what Just Listen is about, it's the difference between listening to someone and listening into someone. And I want to demonstrate that right here and right now with you, and tell me what you think or feel. So as I'm listening to you, you're teeing up good questions, we're having a good conversation, you're inviting me to share stories, you seem to be enjoying what I'm saying, even though some people who are listening would say, boy, he's all over the place. But you can't please everyone. But if I was listening into you, Deborah, and see, everyone can do this, what I hear is how important it is to you to give value to your listeners. I mean, it's extremely important. It's even a calling. And you're always looking for something that will give them that value that they can use today to make their lives better. And I'm also guessing that you're on the lookout for some people who maybe were famous or something like that, but when you're speaking to them, you think to yourself, I can't send this out. This person was awful. What do I say? I can't put them out there to my listeners. And how do I work around that? But I think you're the trust of your listeners to you for great information is extremely important to you. Is any of that true?
Absolutely, it is. One of the things, and you hit the nail on the head, that I do feel that this is a calling for me to help build people up rather than tear them down, and to be able to help people step into who they need to be, and eliminate some of that negative self-talk of, or even the external factors of people saying that you can't do that. What makes you think you can? And I'm here to tell people, yeah, you can. And through our show with leadership and business and human potential principles, I believe we can help people live richer lives. And that definition of rich is whatever that person defines it to be.
I have a personal mission called Healing the World One Conversation at a Time, because I've had conversations like that in my work with suicidal people, in which in one conversation they gave up their suicidality. And what I'm trying to coach people on is that if you look into people's eyes and your only purpose is to get where they're coming from, not to sell them on anything, not even to solve anything, just to be with them. If you look into their eyes and you pick up things and you're curious about it and you ask, and you don't give them solutions unless they ask for them. If you look into their eyes and say, where are you scared? What Where you're scared. It'll be okay. Just tell me. Or what's your most grandiose idea that you can't share with anyone? Mine is, I'm going to do this one-man show around the country. I'll be Steve Jobs. That's a little grandiose. It's a good thing my wife will never listen to this interview. But, but I think if you look into people's eyes, there's one of my favorite quotes about listening, and it's in the book Just Listen, comes from a British psychoanalyst named Wilfred Bion. And he said, the purest form of listening is to listen without memory or desire. And what he meant by that is when you listen to people with memory, you have an old agenda that you're trying to plug them into. And when you listen to them with desire, you have a current or future personal agenda that you're trying to plug them into. But if you can be what I call a pal, and pal means purposeful, agendaless listening. Purposeful, agendaless listening. When you just look into people's eyes and listen into them, people will just fall into it. In fact, when I did the little exercise with you, and I got it right, and I said, did I get it right? You laughed.
You got it right there.
Yeah, no. And I think you laughed, if I'm listening into you, because there was a part of you that found it was really pleasurable that I knew that meaningful part of you and was able to understand that. So you didn't feel alone in this important part of you, and you kind of smiled with my guess is you had a little bit of a whoa, wow.
Yeah. Because, when we just meet, it's surprising that someone can tap into that so quickly. And it's just when I think of people in sales or leaders who might meet someone in a moment, that they can have that impression, that whoa, wow impression right away, and then go to, what is she doing?
Yeah. And you just triggered an anecdote, a story I have to tell about the power of listening into people. So I was one of the main speakers at something called the Association for Corporate Growth. It's a big yearly conference in Beverly Hills, and the other speakers one year were Jerry Levin. He's the one. He was still living down. Well, he'll never live down. The Time Warner AOL thing that happened. But the real big fish in the pond was a guy named Mike Heisley, and Mike Heisley, it was a billionaire, smart like a fox, very humble guy from Chicago. And so the night before, everybody's, the speakers get to meet each other. And so there's a line wanting to hit on Mike Heisley because, he's a successful billionaire, turnaround person. And people are in line waiting to meet him. And I was probably the least well-known of any of the speakers. And so I get in front of Mike and I look into his eyes, and I don't know what possessed me to say this, but I looked at him and I said, what did your father teach you about success? And he blinked at me like, huh? And I said, what did your dad teach you about success? He paused, and then he reached behind him, pulled out 2 chairs and say, let's sit down. And everybody's looking at me. Who is this guy who got Mike Heisley's attention? Wow. What did this happen? And then he told me this story. And he said, years ago, I was about to do a deal with regard to a company. And I said to my father, I said, I'm about to do this deal, and the only person who will do very well from it is me. People in the company, nobody else will do well, but I'll do really well. And he said, and my father looked at me and said, why would you want to do a deal that hurt other people? And so my father saw something in me that I could succeed by being honorable, high integrity, and caring about people. And he made me want to be a better man. And I think I have. And so I actually wrote up that little interview in a column for the National Association of Corporate Directors. But and the point is, a lot of people say, well, you're a shrink, you can do that sort of stuff. I wouldn't do that. But all of us can do that. All it requires is giving up our agenda and there to be a couple of things that my late mentor, Warren Bennis, big leadership guy, taught me. And they stick with me. He said, when you go to meetings or you go to meet people, be more interested than you are interesting. Be more fascinated than you are fascinating. And also be a first-class noticer. Because noticing is different than looking, watching, and seeing. When you look, watch, and see, you're sort of passive. But when you notice, you're absorbed in it. So for this whole interview, I haven't seen your face because I'm looking into the camera. I probably look like a deer in the headlights of this camcorder here. I'm looking in the camera to make eye contact with with my, and I've never stared at this green light that's staring at me, which is this, this stupid camera that I'm trying to give you eye contact with. But, and you'll say, Mark, I think you're a little bit an inch to the left because anyway, but I've never noticed that. I've never noticed this green dot on my camera that's staring back at me. So when you're a first-class noticer, and also you're there to be more interested than interesting, it's amazing how people will open up to you and want more of you.
So let's go there. When people go to networking events, so often I've been to some networking events and people are actually playing blackjack. They're handing out their business cards to everyone. You got to have my card. You got to know me. And I have that pullback feeling as soon as people do that versus, and who are you? Because I want to know people and have that connection. What do you recommend by using this noticing when you're coming to a networking event with people you don't know? How can those people who are maybe introverted or very uncomfortable in crowds become a master networker by using these techniques?
Well, one of the things I do, but I know that I'm going to focus and notice and listen and get them to open up. And I'd like a female equivalent for this because this is very American cowboy. And so sometimes I will, when I go to a networking event, and I won't say this to a woman, but I'll say it to a man, I'll meet them and I'll look them in the eye and I'll say, so what's your deal? It's like the mafia in me. So what's your deal? And what happens is it's very friendly and they open up. I think if I meet a woman, it'll be a different thing. I'll say, so tell me about you. It's more inviting. Tell me about you. It's an inviting tone. Another tip, because something I will also say to your listeners is I'm incredibly shy. I'm painfully shy. And I'm a founding member of the Dread Going But Glad I Went Club. Because I'm not social. I'm not good with small talk. But one of the things that I've noticed is that when I can do that and go up to people, and this I believe is in Just Listen, I think I call it FTD delivery. And what FTD stands for feelings, thoughts, and doing, actions. And when you're in a conversation with people, if you can ask them about what they thought about something or what they would do if they were that person. What would you do if you were in that place? Or what would you feel? Now I use it slightly differently with women than men, because if you use the F word for men is feel. They can't stand the word feel. But when you get someone to express what they feel, they're more engaged. So with men, I might say, what do you think about such and such? What would you do if you were them? And I can sense that they're more engaged in the conversation. And then the way I get them to express their feeling, I'd say, if I was that person, I'd be feeling very pressured. What do how about you? So there's something about someone being able to say what they feel. Now I can obviously bring out the feeling word with women because, they don't feel so offended by that. But what I've discovered is when when I can ask questions that cause people to say, well, this is what I think, well, this is what I do. And then if it's with men, I bare my neck into the conversation. If I was them, I'd feel really under pressure. I know politics is a terrible thing to talk about, but they're speaking about why Trump doesn't take daily briefings with regard to national security and that kind of thing. And I think part of it is he knows his limits. So he has to identify a person to actually understand what the briefings are about, which is okay if he gets the right person in the right position. You don't have to be a genius as long as you get the best people positioned to do the job.
Mm-hmm. So you're going back to, and when I hear about having the best people in the best place, keep going back to that, those leadership, but the visionary leader versus the visionary thinker. So we have people who are thinking about things, and you have the visionary leader. What do you think happens when some of these leaders who, and I can use myself as an example as well, that if what they're doing is they have this vision and they keep facing resistance. It might be an individual who they keep resisting with. How do you get to that place of having the conversation to understand where is this resistance coming from, while using also those listening techniques?
Well, I got to tell you this because it's funny. I did a webinar with the Medina Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, and so if you do webinars, I did it actually from where I'm doing this with you, because you show a slideshow, and it's up there. If you look up Medina Institute in Goulston, you'll find it. And the webinar was overcoming resistance to change in others and yourself. And so my whole hypothesis for the webinar was resistance to change doesn't exist. That what exists is non-functional, non-rational self-preservation. So if you can look at people being really afraid to step out of where they are competent, confident, and they feel in control, then you won't get so frustrated with them that they're resisting you, because a lot of people, what they do is so specialized that when they have to step out of it, they feel really uncomfortable. That's the problem for a lot of marriages, at least in America, is that often one of the spouses is much more practical or rational or logical, and the other one is more emotional. Mm-hmm. And so the emotional person doesn't want to get into a conversation if it feels very cold and robotic, and the logical person doesn't want to get into a conversation if it feels like it's all about emotion. So if you can understand that where they're coming from is for self-preservation, then you won't get so upset. So here's the funny thing, and people said to me, it's a good thing you weren't there in Saudi Arabia, because they would have executed you they would have beheaded you on the spot. So if you can imagine this, here I am at my computer, and there they are at this, Leadership Institute, and they're watching these slides that I'm talking about. And one of my first slides was a teenager with his back to you peeing on a Rolls Royce. It's one of my first slides. And I said, what if you walked out of this room and this is what you saw, that someone was peeing on your car? If it was me, I would be very upset. And then the next slide was a picture of a teenager with Down syndrome looking at you and smiling. And I said, what if that person turned around and it was this? If it was me, I would go from being angry to, they don't know any better. Mm. This is what they're doing. And instead of yelling at them, I'd say, it's not a good thing to be doing that. And I said, the rest of this webinar is about how you changed. But, what people told me is, if you did that, Mark, they would have beheaded you if you were there. Trust me.
It's interesting because when you say that self-preservation, yet when you have those two characteristics, and all of a sudden it's okay, mm-hmm. and they don't know any better. They don't know what they do.
Yeah, and so one of the ways to break through mm-hmm. is to say, if you can accept that they're locked in self-preservation, if instead of getting frustrated, and my book's filled with this thing called the amygdala hijack, and you're reacting, mm-hmm. if instead of reacting, you say to yourself, oh, they're not resisting me, they're feeling threatened. They're feeling like I'm pulling them out of where they feel competent. And what you can say to them is, tell me how you came to your point of view. Clearly we see things differently. Tell me how you came to your point of view. And then if you can learn to listen as they talk about their point of view, what will often happen, as long as you're not judgmental, is they often will discover that their point of view is flawed. Meaning they'll talk about something that maybe happened years ago. And that's why they think the way they do. And you can say back to them, how many years ago did that happen, that you came up with that point of view? Oh, about 15 years ago. Have you ever run into situations where the way you thought before just doesn't work anymore? Because I've run into those things. I run into those frequently. Yeah. And so do you follow what I'm saying? Is you can lead them towards questioning what they're saying in an open, safe way, as opposed to defending what they're saying because they feel like you're threatening them.
That's very powerful, because what I hear when I listen to that is that you're actually, as you were saying, making yourself relatable, that you're not a different level than them. You're actually saying, hey, you know what, I've been through this experience as well, and this is what happened to me. And then you're taking them along a journey with you into a new perspective.
Oh, absolutely. And something I have to share because of the nature of this show and who's going to listen to it. There's something, sometimes when I give talks, I will often say, how'd you like to know some tips for getting through to someone who doesn't want your advice or solutions and just wants you to listen to them? And the men in the room, they whip out a piece of paper and they're taking notes as if everything else I'd said to them was useless. But they're all like, tell us. Or I'll say, how would you like to get through to someone who keeps giving you advice that you don't want, and it just makes you feel frustrated? And so often the more emotionally processing people go, oh yeah, I'd like that. So there's a term called mediated catharsis. And what that means is when you can put into words the negative thing that the other person is feeling towards you, but wouldn't dare say to you because they know it will get you upset and defensive, it disarms them. So actually a few weeks ago, so I'll give you both the versions. I'll be an equal gender offender here. So recently, I ran into a woman, and we'll call her Jennifer. That's not her name. And she was saying, you know, I love my husband, but he's like an engineer type. And people, you know, and he says I blither a lot, which I probably do. But he becomes like a robot. And even though I blither a lot, people like me. And they kind of respect my husband, but they mainly tolerate him because he's kind of a little bit constipated, sort of psychologically. And we drive each other crazy. So here was my advice to her. And we'll call her husband John. That's not his name. You could say, this is called mediated catharsis. So when you're getting into a discussion and it's getting heated up, you pause. And you look at John and say, John, and exactly this tone, John, I think I got a way out of this, which is better than what we usually do. Play along with me. Now, if you're the more emotional processing person, John's going to think, I'm fine now. You stopped. That's great. I said, but this is how you can get even more out of it. You could say, look at me, John, and say this to me. And so you look right into his eyes and say this to me, John. Jennifer, when you get emotional about things and you go on and on, I feel like I'm having a stroke. It drives me crazy. I want to pull my hair out and there's no good ending to it in sight. And I said, if you say that to John, you know, he can come up with his own words, but he's going to go, what? And then you say, no, John, play along with me and just say those words. Because what will happen is you're helping him get stuff off his chest that he wouldn't dare say to you. And since you're in charge of the whole conversation, you won't get defensive. So a week later, I see Jennifer and I said, how'd it go? She said, I've got good and bad news. The good news is it worked perfectly. And not only that, I could see that he was getting stuff off his chest that he was just holding on to. So he went on for about 5 or 6 minutes, and he got all this stuff off his chest. That's the good news. The bad news is he's following me around like a puppy dog. He's telling me how much he loves me. He's telling me how I'm the great. You know, I kind of like the robot. He's getting under my skin. He's loving. He's warm. He's all this stuff. I think I've created a monster. You know, so but I think that's kind of funny. But what I tell them, often the men, if you're dealing with, if you want to get through to a person who doesn't want your advice, you do the same thing. So if I was coaching John about Jennifer, I'd say, John, when you're in an argument with Jennifer, and it's important to get the tone right, because if it's up or down, it'll lead to an argument. So you say, Jennifer, I think I got a way out of this better than what we used to do. Just play along with me. And she'll say, what? No, just play along with me and we can get back to this, but I think I've got a way out of this. So just play along with me. But you have to say it in that tone. And then what I would coach John to say to Jennifer is this: Jennifer, say to me, John, when you give me solutions and advice that I don't want, it feels like you're talking down to me like an idiot, and like all I am is a problem for you to solve, and then you feel so high and mighty when you give me a solution when I don't give a darn about the solution. I just want you to listen to me. And so, and I've given that advice often to men with women, and what happens is the woman starts giggling. And just like in reverse, the man starts giggling, because what you're doing is you're enabling them to get stuff off their chest. That's why it's called a mediated catharsis, and they recapture the good feelings they have underneath. So I know that was a long story, but I hope some of your viewers and listeners will find it useful.
Absolutely. I like to play along with me. Just work with me, you know, just follow along. And when you say that almost gives the other person permission, and that powerful piece of, yeah, that's what I'm thinking, but I didn't want to hurt you.
That's right. And it's amazing when you get stuff off your chest. It's amazing how helpful that can be.
And I can see how you can use this in organizations as well. But of course, we know what happens in our personal lives can spill over to our professional lives as well. So we're one person, but we can take these skills in many directions.
Well, I think you can use it. You have to change it up a little bit,
For sure.
But I think you can use it in your organizations and companies, especially when you have, you know, these sales type people who talk faster than I think, and they're dealing with engineers who are very deliberate, you know, step by step by step. And so I think you can use that mediated catharsis between them. I could see the IT person saying to the salesperson, say this to me: when you talk so slowly like an engineer and a robot, you know, it makes me want to overdose on Ritalin. You drive me crazy, or something. And you know, and it'll have the same breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this interview has been phenomenal. We've talked about so many different topics, but they tie so well into just communication, but also creating that compelling vision and how to get the followers on board. How can people be in touch with you and learn more about what you're up to?
Well, there's actually 3 places. So Goulston Group, I have a consulting company and train people in that. The Mark Goulston is kind of my speaker site. I'll just list a couple more. Speaker Hub. And by the way, I would offer this to you and your viewers. Speaker Hub is in Brussels, and they have a LinkedIn model for a speaker site. And so you can get a free profile. Anybody can get a free profile like you can on LinkedIn. How they make their money is when you get upgraded to a premium package, or upgraded to a VIP package, which I have, and you know, you pay, it's a subscription, but you get better benefits. If you go to Speaker Hub and look me up, it's probably the the best speaker profile I have anywhere on the internet. Everywhere else, including my LinkedIn site, although those other sites I told you, you'll say it's all over the place. I mean, you can still visit them, but if you like, what we can offer to your listeners is I'll reach out to the CEO of Speaker Hub, Andros Benes, and make available a free upgrade to premium package for 6 months. So they'll get a taste of the paid package free, and offer that to you and introduce you to Andros, and then he could probably give you a link so that your listeners can then get that free premium package. It's a great site. It's kind of like the people's version of speaker sites, and they don't get any commission. So and they have event planners, so they list many events, but most of the events are very low paying, or you speak for free, but you find out about them. I've recently applied for 2 TEDx events, and we'll see if they accept me.
Oh, I'm sure they will. We'll be all rooting for you, and that would be a wonderful gift. We'd really appreciate it here on the Millionaire Woman Show. I want to thank you again for coming on our show. It's going to really impact our listeners, and I want to just leave with asking you one question of yourself being a leader. Mm-hmm. What would be 3 tips you would offer someone who is just learning to see themselves as a leader or starting to stretch themselves in a new direction, the things that they should be thinking about as they step into the leader they want to be?
You need to be extremely clear in what you say. I remember I attended a workshop where someone was talking about leading through change, and he was using a lot of these buzzwords, and it sort of made sense, and people were nodding from the neck up. But because I have to speak my mind when I see something, I said, I think the challenge is not leading through change, it's leading through fear. The fear of people. And when people are afraid, you have to realize that their minds are constricted. They often can't learn or listen because their minds are anxious. So when you're leading through fear, which is almost everywhere, you have to be clear and give people specific, doable things that they can't mess up. I mean, because if you give someone a specific thing to do, like one of the things I will give out to people is a multiple step formula for reaching out and giving an unsolicited apology to certain people. And when you give an unsolicited apology following these steps, it changes the relationship. And if they follow the steps, they can't mess it up. So you give them a specific things that they can do, and then they'll start to give you more of their mind. And I think clarity and steps that are doable are more important than ever. Also, something I would say is, this could be a whole other interview about, it's really important as a leader to get buy-in from investors, to get buy-in from customers and clients, and to get buy-in from your employees. To get buy-in, here's another one of my little 3 steps things. It needs to, whatever you're saying needs to make sense to someone, feel relevant, and be doable. So when people are listening to you, they're thinking, does this make sense? And I don't mean logical sense, like, does this seem rational? And does it feel relevant? Does it feel like this is actually going to help us? And is it doable by me? That's another thing that leaders need to know, is that it's got to be doable by your regular people. If you come up with stuff that's only doable by geniuses, it's never going to get done.
That's very powerful, because again, we go right back to where we started from, about talking about Steve Jobs and those principles, about making sure that it's relevant. But we want to make it fun, and we want to make it engaging. Otherwise, people aren't going to be drawn into it and step into that leadership. And to have those followers.
Yeah, and what will happen is, see, when you do that, another thing that I suggest is I'm not persuasive at all. I mean, you might say, really? You persuaded me already. I'm influential. And influence lasts much longer than persuasion. Persuasion lasts until, whatever the perk, runs out, and then they want something else. And I think to be influential, you need to be someone who is more than about yourself. People are drawn to people where there's a kind of almost classy nobility to them. Another place people can, I give away all my intellectual property I'm a syndicated columnist for Biz Journals. So if you go to Biz Journals, Goulston, you'll find, I just give it all away. And then if people, want to hire me to do a presentation on any of them, you can. And there was a recent thing that I did that has done pretty well. It's called 6x6 Leadership, Your Presidential Scorecard. And I talk about the six attributes of a great leader, and see if this makes sense to you. What we want to feel towards a leader is we trust them, we have confidence in them, we respect them, we admire them, we like them, and we feel inspired by them. Trust, confidence, respect, admire, like, inspired. So those are the 6 ways we want to feel towards a leader. And even if that feels too soft, if you think of a leader that has the opposite, we don't trust them, we don't have any confidence in them, we don't respect them, we don't admire them, we don't like them, and we're not inspired, you're never going to follow that. And then it's a 6x6. It was to be used for the presidential debates here. Use these and see how they come out. Mm-hmm. As you can imagine, they didn't come out too well either. And then following that are the 6 traits, 6 actual behaviors that you watch for. Mm-hmm. To cause you to feel those 6 feelings. And the 6 traits are: they're unflappable, present, so they're not robotic, but they're kind of cool, calm, but they're present. Unflappable, present, knowledgeable. Oh, they really know what they're talking about. Wise, they know what's important and what's not important. They're gracious. So they're good winners and they're good losers, and humble, as opposed to just being arrogant and narcissistic. So those 6 behaviors that we look for that cause us to feel those 6 feelings are unflappable, present, knowledgeable, wise, gracious, and humble. So again, I've probably given about 9 lists out, and if you say enough with the list, go to Biz Journals, Goulston, you'll find them all there.
This has been one of the most dynamic.
All over the place.
No, it's just so rich. The conversation is so rich, and I can just reflect here right now and think of all the lessons you've shared with us and bringing such value to our listeners and, our viewers here. And I want to thank you so much for doing the work that you're meant to do and leaving that impact in the world as a leader. And thank you very much for joining us on the Millionaire Woman Show. For those of you listening, I want to thank you for joining us for our official launch to phase 2 of the Millionaire Woman Show, where we're going to be interviewing some of the greatest thought leaders here around our globe. And also for you to go over to iTunes, subscribe, write a review, give us a 5-star high 5 rating. We would love to hear from you and hear about some of the nuggets that you have learned, that you have actually taken those and take that, get to that, whoa, wow.
Whoa. Yes.
So let's take you all the way there, because I know I've had a lot of those today, and I'm going to look at implementing many of the things that Mark has talked about today, and I hope that you do too. So please share with us. Go to www.deborahkozowski.com and check out the blog site. If you want to, go see the video so you can have a visual of Mark here as Steve Jobs. And we can't wait to hear about your one-man show. And look forward to seeing you on the TEDx stages. Thank you so much, Mark.
My pleasure. And you can also find me at Mark Goulston at Twitter. So you can reach me there if you don't have more than 140 letters you want to send me.
Excellent.